interesting fight coming up this weekend. Flyweight never die. We have Victor Altamirano taking on Carlos Hernandez. A couple of flyweights that are getting the opportunity, having won their fights on Dana White's Contender Series this past season by split decision. That's something that we don't see very often. And for Victor, coming out of Mexico City, Mexico, training in Texas out of V-Fit, House of Champions. This is a guy who, even though he won the fight, his opponent, Candelario, also got a contract. That was the first contract handed out on Contender Series in, the 5 seasons of the show, where the loser actually got a shot. And in the first round, Candelario looked really good. In the second round, he slowed down. In the third round, he got beat fairly handily. And this is really where the nuts and the bolts of this fight really do matter. Because if you looked at it for Altamirano, listen, really, really sneaky fighter. He's on a tidy little 4-fight win streak. And if you go back and you look at his last loss, it's against Jared Brooks, who was making his way back into the world after losing.
I just have to cut you off, Craig. I'm sorry. No single person has suffered more when the UFC almost cut the flyweight division than Jared Brooks. Please hear me out. This guy lost a split decision to Deiveson Figueiredo. And I'm going to pull a Craig right now and say lost a split decision. Because I got to be honest, I thought he beat Deiveson Figueiredo. You know, the guy who currently has the title, who just beat Brandon Moreno 2 times in 3 fights, or at least 1.5 times basically. Jared Brooks ends up losing his next time out to Shorty Torres, which was weird because he knocked himself out going for a takedown. Hashtag look into it, Eddie Bravo style. And the UFC gets rid of him because they believe they're going to give up the division. He hasn't lost a fight since. Now, currently he is under contract with 1 championship, so he has landed on his feet. It's not like it's ended all poorly for him. But oh my goodness, I get sad thinking about what could have been with Jared Brooks. A dominant wrestler who had really good cardio, decent stand-up. I just get really upset thinking about the fact that he was able to go tit for tat with a guy like Deiveson Figueiredo. Then he has sort of an embarrassing moment against Shorty Torres, and then we never hear about him again. Sorry, I'll give it back to you. I just had to get that out.
No, there's somebody in their car that's just banging the steering wheel because we went off topic, but I'm absolutely fine with it because it does help tell the story of the loss that Victor Altamirano has on his record. Because if you do go back and watch that, and if you factor in Jared Brooks' overall career arc, the guy was on a heater of a win streak.
He was so good.
Undefeated as an amateur, undefeated as a pro, loses to Figueiredo, loses to Shorty Torres, then goes out, beats Roberto Sanchez, has an accidental headbutt in Ryzen, so it's a no contest on his record, beats Altamirano, beats Oshie in the rematch, and then he goes out and gets 2 wins over with 1 championship. Jared Brooks is a very good fighter, and when he fought Victor Altamirano, he goes out there, takes him down at 5 seconds of the first round, and holds him down for the entire first round. Then in the second round at 11 seconds, he catches a kick and takes him down and then ends up finishing him. So for Victor, again, that's his only loss as a pro. As an amateur, pretty decent little career. He did go 4-3 as an amateur, but this guy has had an interesting run because all the way up into the Jared Brooks fight, he was 6-0, 5 of those wins by finish. But he hasn't really gotten a lot of finishes since. He does have one over Lloyd McKinney. That is a very, very good one. Lloyd McKinney is one of those guys in the regional scene that if you pay attention in the States, you know his name. 2nd round triangle choke win there. He then goes out and headlines LFA 100. The best part for Victor Altamirano, the craziest part of it is, you might not know this, in 2017 as an amateur, he was on the undercard of LFA 1. Then he headlines the main event of LFA 100. It's not often in North America you have flyweights that headline a card, but Victor Altamirano was able to go out there, do that, win the belt over there with LFA. A big win over Nate Smith, a guy who had some of the best wrestling credentials that we've really seen over with LFA. So a huge win for him there. A couple 50-45s, 149-46 in that fight. Goes out, fights Carlos Candelario. Split decision win for me. It might sound weird, but I actually scored that fight for Victor Altamirano. Again, I mentioned it. I thought he lost the first round. He won the second. He won the third. But again, we're going to kind of go both ways in this fight because I love these prospects and I want to really give them their due. Maybe if you missed out on some of the tape study, that's where we are. We're here to fill you in on these guys. The one thing that I love out of Victor Altamirano, it was in part of my notes, his Taekwondo is great. His takedown defense is not good, and he accepts bottom position. And I know he's got triangle choke wins, he's got a Darce choke wins. He loves the defensive submissions, but he gets held down for moments. And again, it does scare me. Not necessarily just against Jared Brooks, but against other fighters as well.
It'd be like if you're going to the grocery store with your mom as a kid, and you're saying, "Hey, can we get Tony Ferguson at the grocery store?" And she says, "No, we have Tony Ferguson at home." Well, Tony Ferguson at home is Victor Altamirano. Now, that might not be giving Tony Ferguson the respect he deserves. It definitely isn't. But Victor does kind of fight like a bare bones version of Tony. He has very porous takedown defense because he does have a lot of belief in his own jiu-jitsu and really his bottom game overall. There's something we were talking about before we started filming this video where if you look early on in his career, he does have a lot of success with his grappling, especially with his submission grappling, going for submissions, getting sweeps, sort of those bigger actions off of your back. But when he does start to fight the better wrestlers, he still has those tendencies where it's like, okay, I can give up this takedown because I'm a good grappler. But against Nate Smith, for instance, who, I gotta be honest, I don't think all that highly of Nate Smith. His stand-up is very, very basic. You can see that in that fight. But he is a good wrestler. Smith was able to just hold Victor down for long portions of that fight. And he wasn't all that active in the top position, which isn't great. It sort of speaks to Nate Smith as an opponent. But if Victor is in there with a more active guy in that top position, a guy, I know he doesn't fight in the weight class, but like Cody Stamann comes to mind. Like Cody Stamann would just lay on top of him for 5 minutes every single round and win like a 30-20 30-20 decision. That's how one-sided it would be. But with Altamirano, I really like his striking. He has great long-distance strikes, and he's really good at throwing 1-2 combinations with his hands and then mixing in his kick. And he has a great kick to the body and great kick to the leg, too. He's a tricky southpaw with that respect, and it's something that his opponents really do have to watch out for.
That's one other thing. I just have a couple more notes before we focus on Carlos Hernandez. I have him listed as a switch fighter. The UFC went that way, too. He will rarely ever go to the orthodox stance just to give a different look, switch back over to the southpaw, but he is mostly a southpaw fighter. You brought it up, the kicks. He's a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt. And we've seen a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt in the UFC make moves in a co-main event in 2022. Nick Maximo. Give him a round of applause. What an awful middleweight fight. It's the worst division in MMA right now. But when I look at this, I mean, Victor Altamirano, he's a guy over there. He's probably Yo-Yo Ma's favorite MMA fighter. Loves to play the cello. But if I can make one more musical reference about him, for Victor Altamirano, the takedown defense, very, very good when he strikes in volume, when he's at range, when it kind of closes into the mid-range, the fighting in a phone booth. He can struggle a little bit. It's like if you're at the grocery store and you're listening and, you might go, geez, what song is that? Well, it's Midnight City by M83. But, if you had that playing at a club, people be bumping, they'd be dancing. But if you play it at the grocery store and you turn the volume way down, you kind of get Victor Altamirano, where it's like, I know that, but what am I going to get here? And that's the big problem that I have when I look at Victor. I mean, this is a guy making his UFC debut in the flyweight division, a division that needs talent. Like, when you go from 15 to 20... that's it. That really is it.
It's like the Mad Max world.
I look at Victor Altamirano. You got to start making moves and starting grooves before they knew we were gone. I expect a 31-year-old making a UFC debut to be able to go off to the races. And when I look at him, I don't see a guy that's going to make any moves in the top 5. I think if you put him against Askar Askarov, you put him against Pantoja,
a guy in his UFC debut can't beat Alejandro Pantoja.
You're 10-1 and 31 years old. You got to start going.
But still, we never talk about that with any other fighters making their UFC debut. So I don't really think you're giving him the credit he deserves. Like, we never say a guy in the middleweight division needs to beat Robert Whittaker after his debut, because that's insane. Like, Simon Oliveira, after he beat Trevin Giles, we were like, hey, you better be able to beat Paulo Costa next week. Like,
if a bantamweight ever beats a middleweight, Michael Morales at 22.
What I'm saying is, we never say that about a fighter. So I think you're extremely nitpicky about a guy like Altamirano. We really only have to worry about him fighting Carlos Hernandez this weekend. And in Hernandez, I also don't see a top 5 ceiling either. So I don't really think that pertains to this fight.
That's a big point that I have. And it relates to this fight, but it relates to a lot of the fighters that we're seeing coming into the UFC right now.
No, I hear you, but...
bridging around the age of 30, and we're in a division where there's only 20 to 25 fighters. Like, you really got to get moving. Now, good opportunity for both guys. So let's focus on Carlos Hernandez, former HFC flyweight champion. He's out of Chicago, trains out of VFS, and we know VFS Academy. We have another fighter on this card from that gym. It's Ignacio Bahamondes, but you've also seen Juliana Pena at that gym, bantamweight champion. You've got Bilal Muhammad, who's really had a bit of a run here of late. And when you look at it for Carlos Hernandez, does a lot of the similar things, but in different ways. I mean, for Hernandez, he can really strike in volume, but when you look at it for him, it's really putting the pressure on his opponent, really trying to back them up, and then once he is able to get them backed up, he does like to try and take the fight to the mat. The other thing that I like about Hernandez in this fight, because for Altamirano, all of the experience, from LFA 1 to LFA 100, the champion over there, you love to see it. For Hernandez, a little bit less in terms of pro experience. 2014 IMMAF champion over at the World Championships. Like, this guy has a ton of amateur experience. What was it? 13-2 as an amateur, and he is now 7-1 as a pro. He won his fight on Dana White's Contender Series by split decision. He had a hell of a fight over there. It's the same thing as Altamirano. Lost the first round, and I thought that he won the second and the third against Daniel Barres coming over from Spain. And with Spanish prospects, to me in the UFC, it's kind of a mixed bag. You hope that they're Juan Espino. You hope that they're Joel Alvarez. But sometimes when you look at the level of competition, it's weird. Now, for Barres, he had a fight against Manel Kopp.
No disrespect to Juan Espino, but do you think anyone's like, I really hope I'm Juan Espino?
Just me. But when I do look at this, I love the level of experience out of that last fight. But other than that, it has been some weaker competition as a pro. But Hernandez is winning the ways that you want to see a guy win, too.
To me, this fight comes down to range management for both guys. Because if Carlos Hernandez can't get on the inside, he's going to get destroyed at kicking range. I truly do believe that. Because with Hernandez, you mentioned it, the Belal Muhammad comp is a fair one. Again, Belal Muhammad is like the best version of what Carlos Hernandez possibly could be. Because Hernandez does like to box himself into that wrestling range. And against a guy like Victor Altamirano, we know that he does struggle with his wrestling defense. And I do expect that to be a problem for him in this fight. But again, I do like Victor's cardio in this matchup. I do think that if he is able to at least keep it on the feet, and this is the weird thing, and I could be talked out of the point that I'm about to make, so please hear me out. I think the way that Altamirano defends takedowns is going to help him conserve energy, because he doesn't fight for a lot of underhooks, because he isn't really going in there to wrestle out of a lot of those chain wrestling takedowns. He'll just sort of give up that top position, which again, I don't necessarily think is a good thing, but I do think for stamina management, it might actually help him, because he has shown the ability to volume strike later on in his fights, and I'm not just going off his last performance either. If you go back and watch his fights, in the 4th and 5th round, he does look like a similar fighter to the guy who's in the 1st and 2nd round, which does mean a lot about a fighter coming in, because how many prospects do we see where it's like, wow, their skills really jump off the page, and then the second they get tired, we're like, oh my goodness, that's a pretty big flaw. With Altamirano, I don't expect that to be a really big issue for him coming into the UFC, so for me, I do put a lot of stock into that, so I do see this as being very much a distance management fight for both guys. If Victor can keep his back off the fence, keep it in the middle of the cage, and really keep it where he can throw his kicks, I think he's going to have a ton of success. And on the flip side, if Hernandez can cut off the cage effectively, which is going to be difficult to do, again, that is one of those skills that it normally takes you to get into the top 15 before you really perfect it. Look at a guy like Sean Strickland. Kind of good when he would follow his opponent, but now that he cuts them off and gets them up against the cage, a much improved fighter. If Hernandez can cut off Victor and get him up against the cage, I do think he'll be able to have a lot of success with his takedowns and with his boxing. I just think on the feet, Altamirano is the much more dangerous fighter.
And that's the scary thing. You brought it up, and I brought it up earlier. You rolled your eyes. But the scariest part about this is we got to talk about guys being able to cut the cage at this stage in their career, at 28 and 31 respectively, in their UFC debuts. It doesn't get any easier than this, and at flyweight, it is so easy to get a couple of wins together and make a move. I mean, think about it. Amir Albazi's unranked. Imagine if that guy was able to have a few more fights. I think he would blow a lot of these prospects out of the water. But here I am sitting here looking at this fight. When we look at the odds for this one, a little bit of a surprise because they've kind of switched poles. I mean, Victor Altamirano open a minus 150 favorite. He's a plus 101 right now. For Hernandez, open a plus 130. He's a minus 123. If we look at the Tapology votes, surprise to us as they are to you. Matt, I'm going to say over-under, going with the Mexican fighter, the former LFA champ. I'll give him benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say 65% for Altamirano.
I think they'll be under. I think they'll be closer to 50-50.
Oh boy. 578 total votes, 82% Altamirano, 91% by decision. For the 18% that have Hernandez, 70% by decision. And listen, we've really given both of these guys their flowers, or at least we've tried to. My negativity just extends overall to the prospects in this division because it really is a tough one. Unless you're like a world champion from another organization, you come in, you have a great opportunity. It's just, I'm down on the fact that lately the average age of a UFC prospect is between 29 and 31. But when it comes to this fight, I love Victor Altamirano. I love his southpaw stance. I like Carlos Hernandez based on the fact he's also a Pan-American kickboxing champion. Yes, HFC, LFA, totally different levels of competition. Out of Hernandez's wins, the combined opponent record is 8-5, which is not very good when you have, 6 wins before Dana White's Contender Series. I love the stick-to-itiveness for both of these guys. We wouldn't have this as a well-matched fight, or we wouldn't view it as a well-matched fight if it weren't like that. But for me, I like Hernandez because the guy doesn't stop pressuring and working the takedowns. And that's why I think it's going to pay out. Again, for Altamirano, I love the striking. I think ultimately, you look at the trajectory for both of these guys in terms of how they've been winning their fights, I could definitely see this one going the distance as well.
I just think Hernandez is going to be eating a lot of damage when he does try to get in range, and I do think that that's going to accumulate quite a bit over time. I'm not predicting a finish for either guy, but I do think Altamirano is at least the more dangerous guy on the feet, and even on the mat too, I will say. With Altamirano, I don't think he has high-level submission ability. Like, this was always my point with Cyril Gahn, and why I would kind of roll my eyes when you talk about his submission ability. Because he's good at submitting guys outside the rankings, but he's probably not going to use that to beat ranked fighters. With Altamirano, I don't expect him to be able to out-grapple ranked fighters in this division, but I do think that if he is able to fatigue guys, I think he will be at least tricky on the mat with some fighters, and he might be able to catch a neck here or there. But I think my overall prediction will be Altamirano, but I think this will be a great fight for both guys.
Big time fight coming up this weekend. We're split on the pick. Matt going with Team Mexico. I have Chicago's own Carlos Hernandez. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. You will not find a longer breakdown on unranked debuting UFC flyweights than you will here with Fight Night picks. So let us know how you feel about that one. Keep it locked in with Fight Night picks. We always say,
let's get into it.